I remember often seeing Nick on Facebook when he'd come home. He'd get on the computer, and sometimes he would sigh. And I'd ask him, what are you looking at? What happened? And he'd tell me that somewhere, some lineman had lost his life. I remember having heartache for those families and being glad that it was not my husband. But then one day it was my husband. One day it was my lineman that was never coming home. Nick Gillen was a lineman for 12 years. He worked most of that time at Pella Cooperative Electric, which is our hometown. But there was so much more to Nick than his career. He was an amazing father to our two young sons, Duncan, 4 years old, and Danik, just 5 months at the time of the accident. We had 7 years of a great marriage, and in that time, we built a home, we built our family, we built a business, and we said, I love you each and every day. Nick was the kind of dad that would leave a note every morning if we were not up to bid him farewell when he went to work. And the note every time would say the same thing, how much he loved us, how excited he was to come home in the afternoon to see us, spend time as a family, and we spent so much time as a family. My most prized possession today is a note that he wrote me the week of the accident. It's written in red Sharpie marker, and it simply says, "Thank you for all you do. I love you." On September 27, 2013, it was the day that would change our lives forever and the day that the notes stopped. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, me and the boys were home, and we were so excited for Nick to come home. We had plans for dinner that night. We were going to a new restaurant that had opened in town, and we had big plans for the entire weekend. Nick had the entire next week off of work for us to just spend home as a family. At 4:20 instead, there was a phone call from John Smith, the CEO of Pella Cooperative Electric, and I will never forget his words as he said, "Lindsay, there's been a car accident, and they're taking Nick to Pella Hospital." As I drove to the hospital, I called a friend of mine, and I said, "Annette, pray." I said, "Pray, pray, pray. Nick has been in an accident. I don't know his condition. I don't know the extent of his injuries, but instinct tells me it's bad." As I rounded the corner to the hospital, Mercy 1, the chopper, was already on the helipad, and I gasped and said, "Annette, the chopper is here, and I know it's for us." I parked my car behind a multitude of police vehicles that were there at the hospital that day. I ran into the ER, past doctors, nurses, and EMTs that were personal friends. They already had Nick ready for transport to the chopper. He was on the stretcher. They'd cut his clothes off. He was intubated, non-responsive, and covered with dirt. I took hold of his hand that's still where he wore his wedding ring. I kissed him on his cheek, and I said, "I love you, I love you, I love you. You are the strongest man I have ever known, and you fight for our boys." I kissed him again on the cheek, and it was then wet with his tears. And I told him again, "I love you, always have, always will. They're putting you on the Mercy chopper, and I will see you in Des Moines." Nick was finishing his workday that Friday, and he was driving his digger derrick truck back to the shop. Highway 163 is a 4-lane highway that runs near our home, and the accident happened less than a mile from there. He was going about 65 miles an hour when the front driver's side tire of his digger derrick truck blew. There was no ability for him to control the truck after that. The truck veered into the median and rolled over. Nick's injuries was a severe head trauma caused from a transformer that he was carrying on the back of his truck that day. If he had not had that transformer on that truck, he would have most likely walked away, as there was not another injury to his body. He was always so careful to strap everything down to DOT standards, but in an accident like that with that type of force, there is no way to strap everything that was back there down for it to be safe and secure. The boys and I drive past the scene of Nick's accident every day. There are ruts cut in the median from his tires, and there's a huge hole alongside the highway from where his truck rolled over. I've never been so thankful for snow until this year, because once the snow fell, we could drive past there and not see those marks. But it was only temporary. After 9 long days and multiple surgeries in the trauma care unit at Mercy Hospital, it was obvious that Nick's injuries were not compatible with life. At 6 a.m. on Sunday, October 6th, just 8 short years after our very first date, I had to make the decision to terminate life support. That morning, I kissed my husband for the last time as they extubated him and turned off his ventilator. I laid my head on his chest and listened as he took his last breath and his heart stopped beating. I promised him that I would do everything in my power to raise our 2 little boys and make him proud every day. For 9 days that Nick was in the hospital, people all over the world prayed that he would be a miracle, that he would get to come home with us. But we already had our miracle in the 32 years that Nick lived. People have asked me in my short time as a widow, what advice I would give to others, to other women that will someday be in my shoes, facing the unimaginable that we have to face every single day. Number 1, I would tell people to build friendships and a support system in your community. We have an awesome support system. Nick was a secretary for a ministry known as Total Outdoorsmen. They're a ministry that reaches men, women, children through the outdoors, through the love of God's creation, hunting, fishing. We now refer to them as the TO family. Nick had so many dreams for how that ministry would grow and the lives that they would touch for the people that would come to know Christ through them. So my advice would be, don't just live in a town. Be active in your community, because if you leave your family behind long before you ever plan to, the gift of relationships is far greater than any monetary amount you could leave them with. Number 2, bless your spouse with a conversation about death. It's inevitable. We have no control over how, when, or where we are going to die. My history as a hospice nurse, Nick and I had conversations as to what our wishes were, but we had always planned to be cremated and our ashes to be spread on our family farm. But that plan was always after we had raised our sons, years down the road, after we had fulfilled all of our dreams together. We never had a plan for me being a widow at 30. And number 3, life insurance. We've all heard that you can't afford to be without it, and you can't. But my advice is, if you are able to afford it, double whatever your policy amount is, because if you leave your family behind, it will never be enough. On Monday following Nick's accident, Tammy Kent came to the hospital and sat down with me. She offered us a donation, and that amount of money meant that even though our lives had stopped, the bills were still coming, and that money was able to cover those expenses. The mortgage that was due on the 1st was no longer a concern. A few weeks later, Mike Boyd, I spoke with him on the phone, and he offered continued financial support for our family. I did not take him up on that offer, but knowing they were there if our family stumbled financially during our tragedy was great reassurance. They have also been wonderful moral support. Tammy has given me the contact information for multiple wives around the country that have lost their linemen as well. Fallen Linemen is dedicated to memorializing these unsung heroes, the men that have lost their lives so we can have the daily comforts that we so often take for granted. Our families living the loss of their linemen and fallen linemen has been a blessing. If not for my faith, I would not have made it this far. A piece of scripture has been my guiding light as we've been walking through this very dark valley. Romans 8:18 reads, "I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." I know that God will take our tragedy and will reveal his glory through it, that through this life and death of Nick Gillen, others will come to know the God that he so diligently served and loved. So I ask you as you all go home to continue each day to pray for families like ours that have lost their linemen, for children that will grow up without the opportunity to know their loving father, and for wives that would give anything to hear, "I love you," just one more time. And pray for the safety of all linemen that brave their job duties each and every day. Thank you.